You don't belong in this house, Adrian. Get out before I throw you out myself. The words hit me like a slap. Standing in the doorway of my stepfather's living room, my overnight bag slung over my shoulder, I could feel every ounce of disdain in Henry's glare. The air was heavy with the unspoken tension of our long history, animosity stretching back to when he first married my mother a decade ago. He hadn't changed. If anything, his hatred had calcified, a bitter crust over a heart I wasn't sure had ever been warm. Henry, I just need a place to stay for a few days, I replied, forcing calm into my voice. I'm not here to start a fight. Oh, I think you've done enough damage in your life without me lifting a finger, he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. His voice was low, sharp, and calculated to wound. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. It wasn't just his words that stung, it was the venom behind them. I had driven for hours, fleeing a relationship that had turned sour in ways I wasn't ready to explain, only to walk into another storm. Henry stood there in his worn flannel shirt, a beer in one hand, the other gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing tethering him to the ground. Behind him, the house was the same as I remembered, wood-paneled walls, a sagging leather couch, and the faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the air. It was a relic of his personality, stubborn and outdated. You always do this, he continued, his voice rising. Run back here when your little life out there falls apart. Well, not this time, Adrian. You don't get to waltz in here and act like I owe you something. I didn't say you owed me anything, I shot back, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. I just need somewhere to figure things out. Is that too much to ask? It is when you're the one asking. The words hung between us, jagged and unyielding. My stomach churned with anger and humiliation, but I refused to let him see me break. Not yet. From the corner of my eye, I noticed someone standing at the top of the stairs. Darius, Henry's son, and my stepbrother, though we were never close enough to feel like family. He leaned casually against the railing, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and caution. His presence reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone in this house, though whether that was a comfort or not remained to be seen. You're unbelievable, I muttered, dropping my bag onto the floor. I didn't come here to argue. I came here because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And whose fault is that? Henry shot back. You can't keep running from the messes you make, Adrian. You think I don't know what happened with your boyfriend? That's right, I've heard things. You're not as innocent as you pretend to be. The accusation hit harder than I expected. I froze, my mind scrambling to piece together how he could know. I hadn't told anyone about the betrayal that had sent me spiraling, the infidelity that had shattered the fragile trust I'd built with Caleb. My jaw tightened as I stared at him, my silence giving him all the confirmation he needed. That's what I thought, he said, a smug smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Go clean up your own mess, Adrian. This house isn't your dumping ground. Before I could respond, Darius spoke from the stairs, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. That's enough, Dad. Henry turned sharply, his expression darkening. Stay out of this, Darius. It's none of your concern. It is when you're treating him like garbage for no reason, Darius said, descending the steps. His calm demeanor was a stark contrast to his father's fury. He's family whether you like it or not. And if he needs a place to stay, he's staying. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief, though I knew better than to trust it. Henry's face twisted in frustration, but he said nothing, his silence a grudging concession. Darius reached the bottom of the stairs and turned to me, his gaze steady. You can stay in my room. I'll crash on the couch. I nodded, unable to find the words to thank him. As I picked up my bag and followed Darius upstairs, I could feel Henry's eyes burning into my back, his unspoken resentment thick in the air. The door to Darius's room clicked shut behind us, sealing off the storm downstairs. But even as I sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the worn carpet, I knew the real battles were far from over. Henry's words had struck a nerve, and no amount of refuge in Darius's kindness could change the fact that I was standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong move away from falling apart completely. For now, all I could do was hold myself together long enough to figure out my next step. "You didn't tell him, did you?" Darius asked, his voice low as he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I looked up from the bed, my hands gripping the strap of my bag like it was a lifeline. "Tell him what? That Caleb cheated on me with my best friend? That I walked in on them and realized my whole life was a joke? Yeah, I'm sure that would really soften Henry up." Darius winced, his jaw tightening. "Damn, Adrian. I didn't know it was that bad." I exhaled sharply, the weight of it pressing against my chest again. It's not exactly something I want to shout from the rooftops, you know? I packed my bags and drove for hours, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd find some peace here. Stupid of me, right? Darius stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Not stupid. Desperate maybe. And I get it. Dad's just, he's been this way for as long as I can remember. He lashes out at everyone, especially when it comes to you. "Yeah, I noticed," I muttered, staring at the worn carpet. For a moment, silence settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Darius seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Why didn't you stay with a friend? Or I don't know anyone but him?" I looked up, meeting his eyes. "Because Caleb was my anyone. He was my everything, Darius. I didn't have a backup plan for when he betrayed me. And as much as Henry hates me, he's still family. I thought that might count for something." Darius sighed, running a hand through his dark curls. "Family's complicated. Especially ours." He paused, hesitating before adding, "Did you love him? Caleb, I mean?" The question felt like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, the answer sticking in my throat. I thought I did. But now, I don't know. How do you love someone who's capable of looking you in the eye one day and stabbing you in the back the next? Darius didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed, his presence grounding. "You deserve better than that, Adrian. Better than Caleb. Better than what Dad gives you. Don't let their crap make you think otherwise." I wanted to believe him, but the truth was their words, their actions, had already burrowed deep, planting seeds of doubt that were impossible to ignore. The door downstairs slammed suddenly, and Henry's voice carried up the stairs. "Darius, get your ass down here." Darius groaned, standing. "Of course. The king summons." He turned to me, his expression serious. "Stay here. I'll deal with him." I nodded, watching as he left the room. The sound of his footsteps faded, replaced by the muffled rumble of voices downstairs. But even with the door closed, I could hear the edge in Henry's tone, sharp and accusatory. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the door and cracked it open, straining to make out their words. "You've been coddling him," Henry barked. "I see the way you look at him, like he's some wounded puppy that needs saving. He's not. He's a grown man who made his own bed. And you think kicking him out fixes anything?" Darius shot back. "He's family, Dad. Or have you forgotten what that means?" Henry laughed bitterly. "Family? Don't lecture me about family. You don't know half of what that word really means." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've sacrificed more than you'll ever know, Darius. And I won't let some kid with a sob story make me feel guilty for setting boundaries in my own house." The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I closed the door quietly, retreating to the bed. It wasn't the first time Henry had made me feel like an outsider, but somehow it always hurt like the first time. Minutes later, the door opened, and Darius slipped back in, his face tight with frustration. "He's impossible," he muttered, leaning against the wall. "Yeah, I got that," I said, forcing a weak smile. Darius studied me for a moment before speaking. "He's holding on to something, Adrian. Something that's got nothing to do with you. But you showing up here? It's forcing him to face it." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not the only one with skeletons in your closet," Darius said, his voice quiet but firm. "You want to know why he's so hard on you? It's not just the gay thing or his usual racism. It's guilt. Pure ugly guilt." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. I stared at him, trying to process his words. "What guilt?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Darius hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "That's not my story to tell," he said finally. "But if you're going to stay here, you need to be ready for the truth. And trust me, Adrian, it's going to hurt." His words hung in the air, a heavy promise of revelations to come. My chest tightened, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future crashing down on me all at once. Whatever Henry was hiding, I knew one thing for sure. It was about to change everything. Henry's voice boomed from the living room, cutting through the tense silence of the house. "Adrian, get down here. Now." My stomach twisted at the sound of his command, but I forced myself to stand. I wasn't sure what this was about, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. Darius caught my arm as I passed him, his expression filled with quiet concern. "You don't have to go," he said softly. "Yes, I do," I replied, summoning a courage I didn't quite feel. "I can't keep running from him. Whatever he has to say, I need to hear it." I made my way downstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. Henry was standing by the fireplace, his back to me, a folded piece of paper in his hand. He turned as I entered, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, anger, guilt, and something I couldn't quite place. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the couch. I sat, my heart pounding as he unfolded the paper and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of me. I recognized it instantly. It was a letter, a copy of the one my biological father had written to me before he died. The one I thought I had lost years ago. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Henry ignored my question, his eyes narrowing. "You think I don't know what this is? I found it in your bag. A letter from a man who actually loved you. A man I could never measure up to, no matter how hard I tried." I stared at him, stunned. Henry's voice cracked as he continued. "I hated him, you know. Your father. He was everything I wasn't, kind, patient, accepting. Your mother never stopped comparing us, even after he was gone. And when she brought you into my life, I didn't know how to be the man you needed, so I didn't even try." I felt the weight of his confession settle over me, a strange mix of anger and sadness bubbling to the surface. "So what?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You took it out on me? For years, you made me feel like I was worthless, like I didn't belong. And now you want me to understand why." "Yes," Henry admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was wrong, Adrian. I let my own insecurities turn me into a man I hate. And now I see you sitting there trying to put your life back together, and all I can think about is how much damage I've done to you." I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. This was the last thing I expected, a broken man bearing his soul, admitting to years of cruelty. "You didn't just damage me," I said finally. "You made me question everything about myself. You made me think that being who I am, loving who I love, was something to be ashamed of." Henry nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm asking you, begging you, for a chance to make things right." The room was suffocatingly quiet. I glanced at Darius, who had come down the stairs and was now standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice trembling with the weight of the truth. "Not yet. But if you really want to make things right, you need to start by proving it. Not with words, but with actions." Henry nodded again, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been lifted. "I will," he said. "I don't expect it to happen overnight, but I'll do whatever it takes." Darius stepped into the room then, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Adrian," he said. "You've got me. Always." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope. The wounds Henry had inflicted wouldn't heal overnight, but this was a start, a step toward something better. As I stood to leave the room, I looked back at Henry. "This doesn't mean everything's okay, but it means I'm willing to see if it can be." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thank you, Adrian." Upstairs, in the quiet sanctuary of Darius's room, I sat on the bed and let out a shaky breath. The weight of years of pain and anger was still there, but it felt just a little lighter. For the first time, I wasn't running. I was facing it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now.